Alright guys, as you can see in the title, today we're talking about the Lorena Bobbitt's case. And what you're reading in the title is literally what happened, so sorry for the spoiler. So back in the 90s, this case became so known in the media. It basically exploded everywhere and became almost like a pop culture event. There were jokes about it, late night sketches, headlines everywhere. But behind all that, there was actually a very serious and dark story. A story that if you looked at it today, it would have been seen in a complete different way. And honestly, it's one of the cases that brings so much anger. So let's take a look at who Lorena Bobbitt was, what her life was like before her name became tied forever to this case, and what was really behind that media circus. Because here's the thing, she wasn't even born with that name. So welcome to another Beauty and Crime Sunday with me, in which I do my skincare while I talk about the chilling cases I found this week. So let's go right into it. Her birth name was Gloria Leonor Gallo, and she was born in Bucay, Ecuador in 1969. But she actually spent most of her teenage years in Caracas, Venezuela, where her story really began before it changed. So Lorena was the oldest of 3 sisters. Her dad supposedly worked as a dentist. Well, not actually a dentist. More like, I do teeth, but let's not ask too many questions about it. And her mom, however, was a housewife. So pretty normal family. Lorena, however, was that girl, super ambitious. She totally had already in her brain the idea of being that businesswoman. Even though she didn't really know what that meant yet. She wanted money, she wanted her little luxuries, because the truth is she did come from a very low middle class family. Like, they could make it through the month, but there were not really any fancy vacations to Paris or Louis Vuitton bags involved, so very low middle class. However, when she turned 15, and if you know Latin culture, you know that kind of like 15, 16 is a very big deal, like borderline kind of wedding. So her parents and the whole family gave her the present to go to the United States. And oh boy, Lorena fell in love. The American dream. She was sold on the idea. And from that moment on, she was like, this is it. I'm moving here. Bye Venezuela. Bye Ecuador. I'm out. And she actually did it. In 1985, Lorena moved to the US to live with her aunt and the cousins in Virginia. Her parents wanted to follow her too, but financially they really couldn't. So Lorena started hustling, let's say, working as a babysitter in those very early years. And this is where destiny, fate, or whatever you want to call it, kicks in, because while she was working, she met someone who would shape completely her future, a woman named Jana Bissett. Now, Jana was everything that Lorena actually wanted to be, a full-on boss lady, let's say. She owned a nail salon, had her own business, made very good money, had rocked her luxuries, and basically had a very nice house. So basically she was killing it, right? And Lorena, well, she got a little obsessed, let's say, with her life, like, oh my god, this is it. This is exactly who I want to be. Forget Cinderella, this is now my role model. So Lorena and Jana became actually very close friends. Jana gave her a job at her nail salon, and not only that, she even helped Lorena get a student visa so she could start actually studying at Northern Virginia College. By then, Lorena was already kind of settling into the US life. Though, let's be honest, her English was still a hot mess. But anyway, however, one night Lorena and her friends went to a bar/club. You know, those kind of places that the music is too loud and people believe they're cooler than they actually are. And guess who happened to be there that night? A whole group of Marines. in uniform. And now let's remember how Lorena is obsessed with the American dream. Well, imagine her, a 19-year-old girl, already dazzled with everything that said USA, suddenly is spotting a group of people in uniform, looking like they just walked out of a recruitment poster. To her it was kind of like, oh my god, this is it, the dream, I had made it. And she kind of sounds a little delusional, but the guy that she actually met that night in Marine uniform was John Wayne Bobbitt. And now let's do a quick detour about John's life. John's childhood wasn't really a Disney movie, no. His mom struggled with substance abuse. His dad basically vanished when he was very young, and he ended up being raised by his uncle and aunt, who thankfully gave him a very stable, very Christian, very church every Sunday kind of upbringing. And later, when all of his high school friends were signing up for the Marines, John figured, hey, why not? And he enlisted too. So fast forward to that night when they all went out. He spots Lorena. They actually start talking. Well, talking. Keep in mind, her English was not perfect yet. So imagine the whole exchange was a mix of awkward smiles, hand gestures, and maybe a few words here and there. So conversation, not really, but somehow it worked. They kind of clicked. They did exchange numbers, started dating, and within weeks they were officially a couple. At first things seemed great, obviously. Lorena thought John was incredibly handsome. Maybe the uniform had something to do with that. I mean, who doesn't love people in uniforms? And while John also thought that Lorena was stunning, you know, the Latina vibe, and she also had a very soft voice, very gentle and very sweet, so John basically fell in love with that. It's given me young love vibes, like those teenage first loves. But here's where things gets, let's say, interesting. Just 4 months into their relationship, 4 months, John proposed. And I know back at that time it was kind of more normal to get married at a very young age, but still, 4 months, a little soon, no? And actually Lorena's mom had flown to the US to see her. The three of them were walking through the park, and boom, John drops to one knee. But now, they didn't really get married instantly, but they didn't take long either. June 18, 1989. They did tie the knot in a very small, intimate ceremony, and honestly, people later said that the marriage kind of felt a little rushed because Lorena's green card actually was about to expire very soon, so now things are making a little more sense. A little suspicious, yeah, maybe. But either way, they did end up getting married, and they moved into a very little apartment in Manassas, Virginia. And at first, things seemed fine, like they always do, and then you start seeing the red flags. So here comes the red flag parade. John was still in the Marines when they actually got married, but very soon after, he got discharged. And I don't know if he was, because you can get discharged 2 ways: honorably discharged or just discharged, get the fuck out of here. So I don't really know which one he got, but after that, it was basically disaster because he couldn't get a job anywhere. People did say he actually tried, or maybe at first, but he kept getting fired, whether for being lazy, I don't know, drinking on the job, or just not doing what he was supposed to do. So I wonder why he was fired. Meanwhile, Lorena was the only one that actually brought money into the house, working at the nail salon, keeping the ship afloat. And then just 1 month into the marriage, yes, 1 month, that's when something very strange happened. Basically become the starting gun of all the bad things that happened in this case. So picture this, John is driving, Lorena is in the passenger seat. Suddenly, I don't know why, he starts going insane, speeding, zigzagging, basically acting like he's in Fast Furious, but in Virginia Drift. Lorena, obviously terrified, begging him to actually stop the fucking car. And John's response, well, not to slow down, no. He turns and slaps her across the face. And then he keeps going, slap after other slap. And Lorena obviously was in shock. Like, excuse me, what the hell is happening? We have been married for 1 month and this is who you really are? So yes, a lot of red flags here. That night she didn't even really got home. She went to stay at Jenna's place because probably she was still terrified and she was trying to process what really happened. But here's the thing you have to understand. Lorena was basically alone in the US. Yeah, she had Jenna as a friend, but no family, no safety nets. And on top of that, she was very deeply religious, so divorce was not really on the menu for her. Married was sacred, and this belief would actually trap her in ways that would actually become painful later. And as things were not bad enough already, John decided to add more chaos into their life. Without even asking Lorena, he brought his cousin to live with them. She comes home one day from work. Boom, random cousin on the couch like it's an episode of 2.5 Men. But it wasn't really funny. This cousin was deep into very heavy drugs, making an already unstable home into a even worse environment. When he eventually left, things didn't really get any better. In fact, they got worse, because that's when John abuse actually escalated. According to Lorena, he started using military techniques on her, tying her up, restraining her, physically hurting her in terrible ways. And many experts who actually studied this case later, they agreed John's violence was fueled by deep insecurity and jealousy. Well, why, you may be thinking, well, let's think about it. John couldn't really hold a job. He wasn't bringing any money. Lorena, meanwhile, was working very hard and bringing a lot of money into the house, supporting both of them financially. This was the early 90s, so macho culture was still incredibly strong. John probably felt humiliated that his wife was the one keeping them afloat. And Lorena, well, she wasn't just working. She was very ambitious. She wanted money, but not the type of luxury like yachts or luxury bags. She simply wanted to just basically enjoy life, treat herself sometimes, and build a future with the money she got. For John, though, this ambition that she had was threatening. He wanted to be the provider, the man of the house. But the truth was that he simply wasn't. And this type of abuse on women, when the guys feel like inferiority complex, that happens a lot. I believe like most of the stories I have read, like 80% something like that. Or when the abuse is into another level, they try to make them stay at home, look at the kids, so they cannot really escape. So this case sounds very common at the cases that we are already used to hearing. So by this point, the abuse was basically daily, and it wasn't just physical, it was also psychological and mental. John would remind Lorena every single day, you are alone in this country. No one's going to want you. If it's not me, it's nobody. And that's exactly how he kept her trapped. So basically, John had her completely manipulated. He made sure she believed that she couldn't really leave him, that she had no one else to count on. And then a few months later, something happened that could have changed everything for Lorena. She got pregnant. Now, Lorena wanted to always be a mom. She was very excited about it. She told John, expecting maybe, just maybe he would be happy, but instead his reaction was brutal. He actually hit her so badly that she started bleeding and then forced her to get an abortion. When they went to the clinic, the nurses thought John was being the supportive husband, sitting by her side, holding her hand, but in reality, he leaned into her ear and whispered things like, "They are going to hurt you. You are going to lose your life. It's going to be agony." It was pure cruelty on his part. Lorena got so terrified that she had a panic attack right there, and the nurses had to take her away to actually calm her down. But in the end, because she had truly actually wanted a baby, but also because as a devout Catholic, this went completely against her beliefs. The trauma of that day stayed with her forever. Now, to give you a sense of just how bad things really were, Lorena and John's marriage lasted 4 years. But during that time, the police were called to their apartment at least a dozen of times. A dozen. They did move homes twice or like 3 times. But the abuse followed them everywhere, and then it became another breaking point. Lorena one day came home from work, exhausted probably, and John wanted to have sex. But she was so exhausted that she didn't really want that. So she said no. But do you think he accepted that no? No. For John, a no was not an option. He forced himself onto her. Lorena would later explain that time as a complete turning point. She said that from the very beginning, John had always been a little rough and she never really liked it. But from that moment on, it became something else entirely. He began to force her into sex regularly in cruel and very degrading ways. And today, while we know what this was, we know what Lorena couldn't put into words back then. Essay inside a marriage is still essay. Even when you are married, no, it's no. So if she says no, it's still essay. So at this point, marriage wasn't just toxic. It had become a cycle of physical abuse, psychological torment, and a lot of sexual violence, day after day. So Lorena was trapped inside it. But now let's make something very clear in this case. Just because you're married, just because the person hurting you is your husband, it does not mean it isn't still essay, as I said. Today, most of us really understand that point, but back then, in the early 90s, well, it wasn't a topic that you would talk about. Society didn't, and marital essay was barely even recognized. If it was mentioned at all, it would usually be taken as a joke, very bad joke. People laughed at it like it was some kind of joke, and it simply wasn't taken seriously. And for Lorena, that made everything even worse. She was living in a constant state of fear, with her nerves completely shattered. It affected her at work and it affected her daily life. So she was starting to break down. On top of the abuse, her husband wasn't really working and wasn't bringing any type of money. So their financial situation was a disaster. And here's where things get even more twisted. John actually started asking her for money to spend not on things, on other women. Not only wasn't he contributing to anything, but he was now literally demanding money to cheat on her, which is despicable. He hurt her physically, he humiliated her psychologically also, and he stripped away any ounce of stability that she had. So naturally, people wonder, like they always do, why didn't Lorena just leave? And the answer is complicated. She was manipulated, trapped, tied down psychologically, but there was one lifeline, just one, her friend Jenna. Thanks to Jenna, we actually have photos of how Lorena looked while she was going through all that. Pictures of bruises on her body, her eyes swollen shut, even one where her lips, it's basically split open. So this weren't lies, this weren't exaggerations, this was her reality. So here's where the thing gets a little messy, because Lorena wasn't perfect perfect either. The typical thing that we have, like the perfect victim, usually that shit does not happen. She did make mistakes. She was ambitious, yes. She wanted money for herself, to buy little luxuries, and honestly fair enough because it was her money. But at the same time, John said that when, even though their financial troubles, Lorena was buying things that they couldn't really afford. And honestly, can you blame her? All the shit that's going through, I think I would probably have a shopping addiction or something to make me at least have some dopamine in my life, you know. But honestly, the guy wasn't contributing to anything to the household, so if Lorena wanted to actually buy things, can we really blame her? And that's just my take. You can decide on that on your own. But here comes the real scandal. While working at Jana's nail salon, Lorena actually stole money, around $7,000. The way it worked, it was that she basically taken cash payments for appointments and just not log them into the system. Customers thought they were basically paying normally, but the payments were never recorded properly. But eventually Jana found out, because 7,000, you would find that out. So yeah, Lorena wasn't really an angel. She was the victim, that she also had made bad choices in life. And that's why it makes the story a little complicated, because perfect victim does not exist. So yeah, Lorena had embezzled a lot of money, and eventually Jana found out. And of course, John found out too. Now, if he was already abusive to her when Lorena hadn't done anything wrong, just imagine his reaction when he finds that out. The violence escalated a lot. And it didn't really stop there, because Lorena started shoplifting dresses from a lot of different stores. She wasn't really sent to prison, but she did get caught and detained at least once. Later, she admitted that she would sometimes steal dresses or shoplift stuff because wearing nice clothes made her feel prettier, more confident. It was almost like her way of compensating the hell that she was living in. And she actually said that she wanted to be prettier for him. That makes it even more sad. At one point, John actually left her because all of this. But after some time, he came back. And Lorena, completely isolated and broken down, let him come back. She just couldn't help herself to leave him for good. By 1993, however, the couple moved yet to another apartment. This was kind of like a new fresh start. They already had like 5, but whatever. John even promised her, "I will be a better husband." We know that's a lie. Neighbors would later confirm that the police were constantly showing up to their apartments because of the screaming sounds inside the house. In that same year, Lorena actually reached her limit. She opened up to a neighbor and even to a doctor about what she was actually going through. Both of them gave her actually like a number to a hotline. And when she called, they advised her, obviously, leave your husband and get a restraining order against him. And she actually did it. For a while, she stayed at her friend Jenna's house while John remained at the apartment. But then another twist. Around this time, one of John's old friends, Robert Johnson, came back to town from Buffalo. The two of them actually started going out, drinking, partying, basically ignoring everything else. Meanwhile, Lorena was torn about it. On one hand, she was desperate to get out. On the other hand, she was very deeply religious, terrified of divorce, and constantly thinking, what will I do alone? So one night, she decided to go back to the apartment. Horrible decision, but John wasn't actually there. He was out partying with his friends. So she got into bed and tried to rest. But a couple hours later, John actually came back drunk, very drunk, and found her there, laying in bed. By then, they had already been talking about divorce. The marriage was basically crumbling, the abuse had piled up, and at this moment set the stage for what changed this case to a whole new level. So neither John or Lorena wanted to actually stay together at this point. But what happens? John rolls in one night, absolutely marinated in alcohol, stumbles into bed and finds Lorena there, What do you think he tried to do? Lorena hadn't actually come back to fight or argue about anything that night. She came back with pamphlets, literal merit-saving pamphlets from a women's association. She wanted maybe to talk things out, just maybe patch things up. Imagine just showing up like, hey honey, I brought some self-help flyers, and then life goes. Plot twist, because once again the same cycle repeats. John drunk, aggressive, but Lorena thinking, that's it, I'm done. She walks into the kitchen to just get some water, just to breathe a little bit. Then her eyes lock on a knife, and in that instant, years of frustration, anger, humiliation, abuse, everything came into her brain, and a switch flipped. And I feel like all the girls can kind of probably relate to this when your brain kind of switches and you're like, oh no, I'm gonna kill this dude. So she grabs the knife, goes back to the bedroom, rips off the sheets, and snip, gone. Goodbye. She cut his pinos off. I don't even know how to feel about this. And now John later said that the pain was so unbearable, or he was just in such shock that he couldn't even scream. He just froze like a mannequin. Meanwhile, blood's going full Tarantino in the apartment. Lorena, she actually bawls. She goes insane. She runs up with the knife in one hand and yeah, the trophy, let's say, in the other hand. Gets in the car, starts actually driving. And at one point she realizes she still has the D in her hand. And out of nowhere, she just opens the window and throws it away. So she just yeets it out the window. She then races to Jenna's house, tells her the whole story, and Jenna, bless her soul, is probably thinking, girl, this is a lot, but maybe call the police. So Lorena actually takes her advice, thank God, and she walks into the station like, hey, so I kinda did a thing. And the cops were like, okay, where is it? And she casually just tells them the exact spot, kinda she tossed it away the window. So this is kind of funny because imagine this, cue the police and firefighters sprinting like they are on a bizarre treasure hunt, a very bizarre treasure hunt. So imagine it's like 3 a.m, all with their flashlights on, looking around for a dick. But the funniest thing is they actually find it. Meanwhile, John is bleeding out at the hospital, and everyone's thinking, well, he's a goner. But plot twist again, because doctors basically pull out a miracle, a 9-hour surgery, and yep, they did reattach it, which for me kind of sounded completely insane. And while you may be thinking, okay, Lucia, but how did they find the dick? Well, while they were looking around, one of them actually stepped on it. And stepped on something that was kind of fluffy. It was like, oh, what's this? And he grabbed it, looked at it, and was like, oh no. And honestly, if I was the police, I would probably, if I knew the whole story, well, if Lorena told the whole story of I've been abused, whatever, I got the dick off of my husband, I would probably looked around, seen the dick. Oops, what's this? I haven't seen anything. Ooh, we can't find it? Well, what a problem. But well, they did attach it, so damn. But then, the worst part is, the world find out about this. The press, radio, TV, oh yes, they made a joke about this. Nobody really treated it like a horrifying case. No, they thought it was funny. Yep, the media, the late night shows, it all got turned into a very massive joke. Meanwhile, poor John, but no one really thought about how traumatic this was for Lorena. She was actually the victim, but the world saw it as a punchline. But then became the trials. There were actually 2 separate trials for this. One for John's abuse against Lorena, and one for Lorena cutting, well, you know. Here's where it gets a little infuriating. Lorena's trial, the one which she was being biased by cutting John's penis, was televised everywhere. Cameras, news outlets, you name it. It was broadcasted around the whole country. Meanwhile, the trial where John was being tried for abusing Lorena, well, nowhere to be found. Not a single camera. And remember, Lorena's actions were a direct result of the abuse, so it kind of made sense that they would televise both of them, but I guess not. Interesting. The society and the media thought, nah, let's make a spectacle of her, not him. In the end, neither of them was found guilty about it. But Lorena had to actually spend 45 days in a psychiatric hospital because the trial decided that she actually acted as a disturbed state of mind. And yeah, she did have proof. Photos of bruises, medical reports, police statements, 12 police calls to their actual apartment. But apparently, all of that did not really matter. The world just shrugged and laughed. And the aftermath? The poor Lorena didn't want to leave her house for years. She was terrified. People laughed. The trauma stuck with her. John, on the other hand, well, he became a minor celebrity. He was on different talk shows, did a fundraising kind of TV special, lived in a ranch in Colorado Springs, and he even went on a kind of tour across the US, telling his story state by state. People made t-shirts about him, yes, t-shirts. Meanwhile, Lorena, whose life had been shattered, was left traumatized and largely very ignored. And that's what makes this case even more frustrating even today. The world found it hilarious, while she suffered a lot. So John became super famous, at least for a while. He was everywhere, but eventually fame kind of faded. People actually stopped caring, and the older he got, he actually admitted that he would now go outside and no one would even notice it. Sounds kind of narcissistic, but okay. So did that stop him chasing the fame? You probably can guess if that's the mentality he has. So narcissistic, he didn't let it go. He made a movie, yeah, an adult movie, naturally, where the joke was that his dick was reattached, let's say. So he started working in Las Vegas, performing at weddings like some kind of circus ad, basically clinging to whatever ridiculous fame he could get. Meanwhile, Lorena, she did something truly symbolic. She turned the tables on the person who actually abused her. The world made a huge spectacle of her actions, right? But never really bothered to focus and at the abuse that she had endured at home, despite all the evidence they had. So she became part of pop culture in ways that were bizarre. Comics, TV, skits, songs, yes. Even Eminem referenced her. And she's also in the background of Fight Club. People imitated her story in a very ridiculous way, completely ignoring what she actually went through. But here's the incredible part. Today, actually, Lorena has actually reclaimed her life. She's fully recovered, especially psychologically. She struggled for years trying to understand why the world found her story funny instead of horrifying. She even now leads an organization helping women facing domestic abuse. So what do you really think about this case? About the media circus, about the jokes, the fame, the ridiculousness of the whole story, and most of it, the injustice, because John was unpunished by the whole thing. I think it shows how far the society has come and how far it still has to go. Lorena's story, yeah, it's shocking, very wild, and just sometimes darkly funny to outsiders, because who thinks of doing that? But at its core, it's a story of survival, courage, and ultimately empowerment. And that's what makes it unforgettable. Well, that was for the story of Lorena. So please tell me below what you think about this case, because this one is insane. So thank you for watching. And remember, do your skincare, and if you don't end up like a glazed donut at the end of it, you're not doing it right. Bye bye.